Hello everyone and welcome to English Beyond Words. I'm Mark, and in today's episode, I've prepared something exciting for you. We're going to experience English through storytelling. But relax, we won't be tackling an entire novel. This is a condensed adaptation of the tale. That means it's brief, accessible, and ideal for building language skills. The story we'll explore today is called The Secret Garden. My friend and partner Sarah will present it for you with careful, clear pronunciation. Here's our plan for today's lesson. First, you'll listen to the narrative presented slowly, using straightforward language. Then, I'll guide you through essential vocabulary from the narrative. I'll clarify each term in an easy and understandable manner. And at the end, you'll have the opportunity to practice shadowing. You can stop, echo, or even transcribe what you hear. So prepare yourself. This is The Secret Garden, adapted specifically for English students. Many years ago, in a grand estate in the English countryside, there lived a lonely girl named Mary Lennox. She was born in India and lived there with her wealthy parents. Her parents were always busy attending parties and social gatherings. They rarely spent time with Mary, and she grew up feeling ignored and angry. She was a difficult child. She was selfish, impatient, and never smiled. No one really liked her, and she had no friends. Then something terrible happened. A deadly disease spread through the city where Mary lived. Many people became sick, and Mary's parents both died. Mary was left completely alone. She had to leave India and travel to England to live with her uncle. Her uncle's name was Mr. Archibald Craven. He lived in a huge old mansion called Misselthwaite Manor. The house had hundreds of rooms, long dark hallways, and was surrounded by wild gardens and open moors. Mr. Craven was a sad and distant man. His wife had died years ago, and he never recovered from the loss. He traveled often and rarely stayed home. When Mary arrived at the manor, she felt even more lonely than before. The house was cold, quiet, and filled with shadows. There were very few servants, and they hardly spoke to her. Mary spent most of her days wandering through the empty hallways. She had nothing to do and no one to talk to. She felt bored, restless, and unhappy. One day, a kind housemaid named Martha came to Mary's room. Martha was cheerful, talkative, and full of energy. She told Mary about the gardens outside and encouraged her to explore. Mary had never been interested in nature before. But she had nothing else to do, so she decided to go outside. The fresh air felt good. The sky was wide and open. For the first time in a long time, Mary felt curious about something. She walked through the gardens and noticed one wall covered completely with thick ivy. Behind the ivy, she could see the top of a garden, but there was no door to enter. Martha told her it was the secret garden. It had been locked for 10 years, ever since Mr. Craven's wife died there in an accident. No one was allowed to go inside, and the key had been buried somewhere. Mary became obsessed with finding the garden. Every day, she walked around the wall, searching for the hidden door. One afternoon, while walking in the garden, Mary saw a small red-breasted bird. It was a robin, and it seemed friendly. It hopped along the ground near her feet and chirped happily. Mary followed the robin, and suddenly, she saw something shiny in the dirt. It was a key. An old, rusty key. Her heart began to beat faster. Could this be the key to the secret garden? A few days later, while following the robin again, Mary found the door. It was hidden behind the ivy, covered and forgotten. She pulled the ivy aside, put the key in the lock, and turned it. The door opened with a soft creak. Mary stepped inside. The garden was wild and overgrown. There were tangled vines, dry branches, and weeds everywhere. But underneath all the mess, she could see the remains of something beautiful. There were rose bushes, flower beds, and stone paths. It had once been a place full of life and color. Mary felt something she had never felt before. She felt hope. She decided to bring the garden back to life. Every day, she went to the secret garden. She pulled weeds, cleared paths, and watered the plants. Slowly, the garden began to change. Green shoots appeared. Buds formed on the rose bushes. The air smelled fresh and sweet. And as the garden grew, something else happened. Mary changed too. She became stronger, happier, and kinder. She smiled more often. She began to care about something other than herself. One day, while working in the garden, Mary heard a strange sound. It was a cry. A child's cry. It seemed to come from somewhere inside the huge mansion. Mary had heard the sound before, late at night, but the servants always told her it was just the wind. But now, in the daylight, she was sure. Someone was crying. That night, Mary decided to follow the sound. She walked through the dark hallways, listening carefully. The crying grew louder. Finally, she found a door. She opened it slowly and stepped inside. There, lying in a large bed, was a boy about her age. His name was Colin Craven. He was Mr. Craven's son. Colin had been sick for most of his life. He couldn't walk, and he spent all his time in bed. He was pale, thin, and very unhappy. He believed he was going to die soon. His father never visited him, and the servants treated him like he was made of glass. At first, Colin was angry that Mary had found him. But Mary wasn't afraid of him. She spoke to him honestly and told him about the secret garden. Colin had never heard about the garden before. He was fascinated. Mary visited Colin every day and told him stories about the flowers, the robin, and the fresh air outside. Slowly, Colin became curious. He wanted to see the garden for himself. One spring morning, with the help of a kind boy named Dickon, Mary and Colin went to the secret garden together. Dickon was Martha's brother. He loved animals and nature and knew how to care for plants. When Colin saw the garden, his eyes filled with wonder. He had never seen anything so beautiful. The roses were blooming. The air was filled with the scent of flowers. Birds sang in the trees. Colin felt something he had never felt before. He felt alive. From that day on, Colin spent every day in the garden with Mary and Dickon. They worked together, planting seeds, trimming branches, and laughing in the sunshine. And something miraculous happened. Colin began to grow stronger. His legs grew steady. His face became full of color. One day, Colin stood up. Then he took a step. Then another. He could walk. The garden had healed him. When Mr. Craven finally returned home, he couldn't believe his eyes. His son, who he thought would never walk, was running through the garden, healthy and happy. The secret garden had brought life back to everyone. Mary was no longer lonely. Colin was no longer sick. And Mr. Craven was no longer lost in sadness. The garden had given them all a second chance. Alright, it's Mark here again from English Beyond Words. Let's now explore some of the most useful vocabulary from today's garden adventure. These words will help you comprehend stories more effectively and express yourself more naturally when you communicate in English. I will present the word, explain it clearly, provide you a practical example, and then we will practice it together. Shadowing time, right? Ready? Excellent. Let's begin. Estate. An estate is a large property with a big house and land around it, often owned by wealthy families. You could say, the old estate had beautiful gardens and a fountain. Now repeat after me. They lived on a large estate. The estate was surrounded by trees. Good job. Lonely. Lonely means feeling sad because you're alone or have no friends. For example, she felt lonely in the big empty house. Now repeat. Mary was very lonely. He felt lonely at night. Ignored. Ignored means not paid attention to or treated as if you don't exist. For example, the child felt ignored when nobody listened to him. Now repeat. She was ignored by her parents. They ignored his questions. Selfish. Selfish means caring only about yourself and not about others. For example, it's selfish to take all the cookies without sharing. Now repeat. She was a selfish child. Don't be selfish with your toys. Deadly disease. A deadly disease is a serious illness that can kill people. For example, the deadly disease spread quickly through the village. Now repeat. A deadly disease took many lives. They feared the deadly disease. Mansion. A mansion is a very large, impressive house. For example, the movie star lives in a beautiful mansion. Now repeat. They explored the old mansion. The mansion had 50 rooms. Moors. Moors are open areas of land with grass, hills, and few trees, often wild and windy. For example, they walked across the empty moors for hours. Now repeat. The moors were cold and quiet. She loved the wild moors. Distant. Distant means far away emotionally, not close or warm with people. For example, her father was distant and rarely showed affection. Now repeat. He seemed distant and cold. She felt distant from her family. Wandering. Wandering means walking around without a clear purpose or destination. For example, he spent the afternoon wandering through the park. Now repeat. She was wandering through the halls. They were wandering in the forest. Restless. Restless means unable to stay still or relax, feeling uncomfortable. For example, the child was restless and couldn't sit quietly. Now repeat. She felt restless and bored. He became restless waiting. Housemaid. A housemaid is a woman employed to clean and take care of a house. For example, the housemaid prepared breakfast every morning. Now repeat. The housemaid was very kind. She worked as a housemaid. Cheerful. Cheerful means happy and full of positive energy. For example, she had a cheerful smile that made everyone happy. Now repeat. Martha was cheerful and friendly. He has a cheerful personality. Ivy. Ivy is a climbing plant with green leaves that grows on walls. For example, the old cottage was covered in ivy. Now repeat. Ivy covered the wall. The ivy was thick and green. Locked. Locked means closed with a key so it cannot be opened. For example, the door was locked and nobody could enter. Now repeat. The garden was locked for years. She kept it locked away. Buried. Buried means hidden under the ground or covered up. For example, the treasure was buried under the tree. Now repeat. The key was buried in the dirt. They buried the box. Obsessed. Obsessed means thinking about something constantly, unable to stop. For example, he became obsessed with finding the answer. Now repeat. She was obsessed with the garden. He's obsessed with that game. Robin. A robin is a small bird with a red chest, common in gardens. For example, a robin sang sweetly in the morning. Now repeat. She saw a robin in the tree. The robin was friendly. Chirped. Chirped means made short, high sounds like a bird. For example, the birds chirped happily at dawn. Now repeat. The robin chirped loudly. Birds chirped in the garden. Rusty. Rusty means covered with rust, old and not well maintained. For example, the gate was rusty and hard to open. Now repeat. She found a rusty key. The lock was rusty. Creak. A creak is a long, squeaky sound made by something old opening or moving. For example, the old door opened with a loud creak. Now repeat. The door made a soft creak. She heard a creak in the floor. Overgrown. Overgrown means covered with plants that have grown too much, wild and messy. For example, the path was overgrown with weeds. Now repeat. The garden was overgrown. Everything looked overgrown. Tangled. Tangled means twisted together in a messy way. For example, her hair was tangled after the wind. Now repeat. The vines were tangled. Everything was tangled together. Weeds. Weeds are wild plants that grow where you don't want them. For example, she spent the afternoon pulling weeds from the garden. Now repeat. The garden was full of weeds. He removed all the weeds. Hope. Hope is a feeling that something good will happen. For example, she never lost hope that things would improve. Now repeat. She felt a sense of hope. Hope filled her heart. Shoots. Shoots are new young plants or stems growing from the ground. For example, green shoots appeared after the rain. Now repeat. She saw tiny green shoots. New shoots began to grow. Buds. Buds are small swellings on plants that will become flowers. For example, the rose buds will open in spring. Now repeat. Buds formed on the branches. She noticed small buds. Cry. A cry is the sound someone makes when they're sad, hurt, or upset. For example, she heard a cry for help. Now repeat. It was a child's cry. He heard a loud cry. Pale. Pale means having very light skin color, often from sickness or fear. For example, she looked pale after hearing the bad news. Now repeat. The boy was pale and thin. His face turned pale. Thin. Thin means not having much body fat, very slim. For example, he was tall and thin. Now repeat. Colin was thin and weak. She looked thin and tired. Fascinated. Fascinated means extremely interested in something. For example, the children were fascinated by the magic trick. Now repeat. He was fascinated by the story. She became fascinated. Wonder. Wonder is a feeling of amazement and admiration. For example, his eyes filled with wonder at the beautiful view. Now repeat. She looked at it with wonder. Wonder filled his heart. Blooming. Blooming means flowering, when flowers open and show their beauty. For example, the garden was blooming with colorful flowers. Now repeat. The roses were blooming. Everything was blooming beautifully. Scent. Scent is a pleasant smell. For example, the scent of fresh bread filled the kitchen. Now repeat. The scent of flowers was everywhere. She loved the sweet scent. Miraculous. Miraculous means amazing and surprising, like a miracle. For example, his recovery was miraculous. Now repeat. Something miraculous happened. It was a miraculous change. Steady. Steady means firm and not shaking, stable. For example, his voice was calm and steady. Now repeat. His legs grew steady. She walked with steady steps. Healed. Healed means made healthy again, recovered from injury or illness. For example, the wound healed quickly. Now repeat. The garden healed him. She was completely healed. Second chance. A second chance means another opportunity to do something or start over. For example, he was grateful for a second chance at life. Now repeat. They all got a second chance. Life gave them a second chance. And there you have it. Your vocabulary journey through the garden is complete. This is how your English grows stronger word by word, step by step. And remember, you don't have to learn alone. We're here to support you in every episode. I'm Mark, and this is English Beyond Words. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep believing in yourself. Goodbye for now.